We are having a little technical snafu, which is always something we just roll with, but we only have one speaker today, or microphone. So we're going to let Roseanne and Jean pass it back and forth.
Hello. 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 How are you doing today?
Right.
Well, we have one major objective today. Jean Hess and I, Roseanne Smith, want to make you become the Mossaholics that we are. So I am Roseanne Smith, Knox County Master Gardener since 2016, and Jean Hess has been a Master Gardener since 2017. And we like moss, and so we are so happy to be here today to talk to you about moss, to talk about its benefits, its structure, and its characteristics, and how that makes you able to determine where moss will live best. Guess what? It's where it already is. That's the clue. But the bottom line is we would like for you to cultivate moss in your own yards. We are Knox County Master Gardeners, and we have a mission to support the extension in providing research-based information to the public. And that is what we want to do, as well as give best practices. We are doing this with the Speakers Bureau, which is an outreach project of KCMG, but also Ask a Master Gardener is. So if you have questions, call Ask a Master Gardener. Just kidding. So why moss? Well, moss has always given us just a feeling of perfection and relaxation, and there's a reason for that. And it has to do with the characteristics of moss, which is a water-loving plant. And where it likes to grow are places that are relaxing. The Japanese cultivate moss lawns, in order to have a place that's like a miniature outdoors, even though you might be over there in a big building, or you may be stuck in an office. It's different to have a time with some moss, and it's perfect. You will find moss in places that have a lot of water. And so, of course, North Carolina, this garden that belongs to Moss and Annie is a demonstration of that. Iceland, we find moss all over the world in all different environments. And this one in Big City is an example of moss growing wild. And the locals like to make miniature homes, and they think the fairies will come and visit. These Swedish moss houses were actually built a long time ago, and the Swedish still build moss houses. These are called backstugas, or nature houses. And so this demonstrates how the substrate of moss can grow on any type of surface. So that's why you see it everywhere. Soil, rocks, even in the water, they will grow, they will adapt. So you might ask, what's moss anyway? What is that? And sure enough, my sister sent me a text. Said, is that a succulent? Actually, no. Mosses are the very first land plant. They are a pioneer and an ancient plant. They have no vascular system, so you don't have a xylem and phloem. All the water and nutrients that they need are absorbed in the leaves. And the water, you also have some dust that might blow in there. All these things mosses take in, and they actually filter the water. So, like I mentioned, rhizoids attached to substrates, and mosses create their own microclimate. They are tiny little plants because they have no vascular system. They can't get that tall, and so down there in that less than a quarter of an inch world, there is a whole separate microclimate where these mosses are generating gases, taking water, and doing all kinds of things. You'll see later, they're also reproducing down there. So they're very busy. So what is moss to you? Do you have moss in your yard? Does anybody have it? So this is an ancient plant, so think about that. When you look at it in your yard, that is from 400 to 450 million years old. Before the dinosaurs, before everything, came out of the water. Of course, Tennessee has the perfect habitat for many mosses. And we'll show some pictures of different types of habitats. But you can see that Tennessee has some geological factors, it has a variety of elevations, has all types of aquatic systems, all types of ways that moss can adapt and survive. And so the UTK Herbarium has scientists that study moss, aren't we lucky? And they have collected more than 450 different types of moss species, documented types of moss species in Tennessee. I might add that Gene and I, we really went into this. So we talked to Garrett Billings at the UT Herbarium, and he did say they offer tours. So, of course, Gene and I weren't able to do that right away, but we want to set one up, so let us know if you're interested, because we'd like to go see what they have. Now, the other thing we want to emphasize is that we have some talented artists. Jean Hess is a talented artist, and her friend Robert Thompson, who is a photographer and ex-attorney, is also a wonderful moss image collector. So this one's an example of an aquatic environments. And of course, Tennessee is ripe with aquatic environments. We're going to be showing several pictures from Robert Thompson. He gave us permission to do that. Now, you will, and I know in my house, I see a lot of moss on rock and on wood, but different species can settle on all types of surfaces. So I also have moss all over my asphalt. We have some pictures with moss on certain types of stones, and they will grow everywhere. And here we find moss being used in engineered systems because of their characteristics. They're used to purify air and do cooling on buildings. And then on the right, I saw where this company is developing a concrete that is a biologic concrete that moss can grow on. And then they will do many different things. For example, they're going to implant system sensors in the moss to track how well the plant is doing. And so, of course, they're going off in the future talking about the types of bio-electro systems that will be in place for purposes like that. So I also want to point out that there are many different research projects going on. So, of course, at UT, Dr. Budke, she studies moss, and it turns out there's parent-offspring competition in moss plants. So her research is on that. We find all kinds of research on using moss as a meter to capture and measure how many pollutants are in the air. Because when moss is out there, it's exposed to everything. And scientists have found that you can actually quantify how many heavy metals are in the air, that type of thing, in different environments. And they are actually using that to take action. So why are mosses important? Well, they provide all types of services. The first one, this one's the most important one right here. Moss started or kicked off the oxygen avalanche that brought enough oxygen on this earth for us to survive. And that was about 400 million years ago. But that also allowed higher plants to develop after that, because the moss actually got soil started. So we use it, people use it. Of course, it helps us to have oxygen, but we use it for all types of things like packaging, insulation. We can burn them. We use them in the gardens and to enjoy them. But they are performing all sorts of eco services for us all the time. They filter the water, the groundwater. they also sequester a lot of groundwater, and so they stabilize the ground that they're growing on. And there's some other things that they do with the gases in the atmosphere. What do you need to have moss in your yard? And ironically enough, these are things that we have to tell people who want a lawn, they want grass that looks like a golf course. And so we tell them these very same things. If you have a moist environment, if it's shady and it's woody, if you have compacted soil or acid soil, is your turf on uneven terrain and have you scalped it? Do you have shallow rocky soil or little sunlight? Do you have a place like that in your yard? Well, that's a perfect place for moss. And if you're trying to grow a lawn, too bad. Because even if you try to kill the moss, and the last time we talked about this, we found lots of ways and poisons and stuff, but they don't work. It doesn't matter. Moss has come, it's been here. It's been here 400 million years. It's not going anywhere. It comes back. So why not invite it? So we talked about different sites, the rocks, the aquatic, all the perfect sites where you find moss. But guess what? You find it in the city too. It grows between sidewalks, it grows on buildings. You just can find it everywhere. And of course you'll find it in your garden bed. So I know we have a lot of garden projects in Knoxville. So which one of them have moss? Does the botanical garden have moss? We were wondering if there was a moss lawn somewhere. Susan Kiss is a volunteer and also led the Knoxville Botanical Gardens and Arboretum project. And she said that there are many places where moss is growing on old rocks and different formations and different rock buildings, or I guess the rock buildings and things that are in the botanical garden. Do the Collier Preserve people see moss? Do you all see moss on the walks? I know it's shady and wet, but I don't remember seeing moss there. So just take some time to look around your own yard. Look wherever you are and just kind of observe it, notice it. It's so small that people just kind of overlook it sometimes, but look and see if you can find it, and then think about these characteristics. So let's get into what we might do in our own yard. And so the first thing we want to do is look at the different natives and species that grow in Tennessee. Now within these 5 species, you'll find a whole bunch of different, I should say genera, but then you'll find a lot of species in each one of those. And so here, instead of tiny houses, we are making terrariums. And they are little tiny ecosystems that have their own little environment in there, their own contained environment, and we brought some of those.
I think it's important just to tell you that we've had a lot of fun with this. And we've discovered a lot of things about moss just by making these terrariums. Roseanne has moss in her yard. I have a lot in mine as well, but the mosses are different. One of the main reasons is, while Roseanne's lot has actual real woods with the kind of ground cover you would find in an established woods and rocks and old wood and a little bit of uneven terrain, although I'm living in a 1918 bungalow on an acre of land, the people who built my house raised pigs in the backyard, and when we moved into this property, there was barely anything growing. It was all just grass and a few trees. So Roseanne gets better moss, in my opinion. It's fluffier and more nuanced. It's sort of spiky and ferny. I have a lot of that kind of moss that seems to like to grow on top of rocks and cement.
We're going to talk some
Yes, we are.
ID.
Yes.
We did spend a lot of time doing that.
Yes.
Yes. So, of course, we're thinking that all of our moths are going to be in one of those categories, but who knows? We also, and I think Jean made this dish garden, but it causes you to think like in miniature, like you're in another little world. And so, like I mentioned, a lot of times Japanese people will have dish gardens just so they can have a place to just contemplate and imagine that that's a little world. Here we go back to real life. This is Jean Hess's garden. And in the photograph on the left, she had stepping stones that were in shade, wanted moss to grow. And so she planted some, and in the second picture here, which is in July, we see beautiful moss has grown all over these stones and make a whole difference in her garden. What did I do?
And that soil has been amended over many years to create something other than just clay, which is what my garden was mostly 27 years ago.
So now it's time to think about moss itself. Let's look at an individual plant and what it looks like. It has most moss, I'll say the typical moss has a female portion and a male portion. And so the male portion grows out of the female portion on this stalk, and we'll talk a little more about that when we talk about reproduction. Critical thing needed in reproduction is water. Moths are able to either clone. You can take a piece of moss and sit it on the ground, and you will see protonema grow and little buds, and moss plants come from that because there's the DNA in the spores to do that. But I will get to that next. Mosses also transform their own environment. Like I mentioned, there's a microclimate down there, and the things that they do make it more favorable for their survival. So here's a wonderful reproduction system. And as you can see, moss either exists as a sporophyte or a gametophyte. But this is just a whole cycle. It starts with spores. Like I said, they can just land somewhere, and they can make a male plant, a male gametophyte, or a female gametophyte. And the male gametophyte will develop at the top of its leaves antheridium that produce sperm, flagellated sperm that have to swim. Or then you have the female gametotype with archegonium on the tips of its leaves, and that's where the eggs are produced. So you get to a certain point where the sperm are here, they're in one part of the plant, the eggs in another part of the plant. How will they ever meet? How will that sperm ever get there to the egg? Water is critical for that. And I have this book here. This is The Forest Unseen. And this author, David George Haskell, spent, I think, a year just studying a certain square footage of land. And one chapter, he goes through mosses. And so just reading this, I'm like, how can somebody sound so romantic about mosses? I mean, he just writes very, very specific and dramatically about mosses. The relationship, and I'm reading of moss to water, is hard for us to grasp. Our plumbing is internal, all buried pipes and pumps. Trees, likewise, keep their conduits below the skin. Even our houses are plumbed from within. Mammals, trees, and houses, these belong in the world of the very large. The micro world of moss operates under different rules. The electrical attraction between water and plant cell surfaces is a powerful force over short distances, and moss bodies are sculpted to master this attraction, moving and storing water on their complex facades. So when the rain stopped, and he goes through some descriptions there, moss has captured 5 to 10 times as much water on its body as it contains in its cells. Moss carries a botanical camel's hump as it trudges through long stretches of aridity. So that means even when it's dry and it looks dead, all it needs is some water to get those sperm moving and into the antheridium. But you also have small insects that can do that job, that will get the sperm on their back, and you just happen to walk into the antheridium. So once we have fertilization, a zygote forms and grows, and its job is to grow a sporophyte. And so this is the female plant that we see here. And this female plant now has the job to protect the sporophyte. So it grows a seta, or a long stalk, to bring it up and away from all of the other mosses down here, so that once spores develop, then they have some space to go somewhere. It also develops protection for these spores. It develops a little hat, which is this sporangium, but it has a cap on top that's called a calyptra. And Dr. Budke at UT has done studies on how different species will develop different thicknesses of calyptra based on a lot of different things, environments, and what might happen to those spores. So that's the critical thing, is that there is a mom watching out for what's going to come later. Once these spores grow and they come out and they spread, they could be windborne, they could be waterborne, they could land anywhere. So this whole cycle starts over again. And it's kind of complex, but the plant has a lot of different options for reproduction. And I think that's probably the real message, is that's what makes this plant so strong. So, now we're to the part of where if you want to have a moss lawn, you need to go and look in your garden and get started. So that's what we spent some time doing. These particular mosses, these came from my yard, and and this is what you have to do. This is the cover where that guy, he went and explored that square mile of his land. He's crawling around like this, looking at the plants, observing them. So, we also know that if you want to have more moss, it is so easy just to pick up a clump and plant it somewhere else. Get it started somewhere else. Just put it there and step on it. Step on it to make sure those rhizoids are taking hold. And once you know more about the mosses that grow in your yard, you can get other ones that are similar or match the criteria of your garden. We decided to do an experiment, and here are some lovely, lovely pictures that were taken by Robert Thompson. Jean said, well, have you identified what they are yet? He said, no, I don't think so, and I'm not going to either. Who cares? But please relax your eyes and enjoy that picture, because now we have the real story about identification. Identification starts with looking at visual clues. How is your moss growing? Does it grow in a clump with the leaves standing straight up? Does it grow in a mat or a layer? You look at all those things and make some decisions, but then you have to look at the individual leaves to decide which characteristics are there, and then you have to narrow that down step by step until you find your moss. So the ones that we were looking at, I think Jean was looking at one. We looked at these things and decided, okay, acrocarp, those are the ones that are more rounded. They look like mountains. So that's an acrocarp. And then you want to look at the individual leaf shape there. And oh yeah, that's really easy to see. But we decided we had a pleurocarp. And I think we had a lance-shaped leaf. And then there's a key. This key says go here, because then you have to answer the next question.
And this is from this book, that we find extremely useful for IGA.
Yes.
We have given you handouts that give the bibliography, and this is one of them,
That is Carl B. McKnight
et al.
and the others. Yes. Common Mosses of the Northeast and Appalachian. That book is very good, but you still have to make decisions. Oh, I wanted to also talk about some of the characteristics, but here's a moss that is in Jean's garden. And so she used a scanner, like a printer scanner, and scanned at 1200 dpi and 24 dpi. And so you can get some interesting images that way. And so this leaf shape was called sickle and in a branch formation. So it's a pluricarp, and probably Hypnum imponens, which is a common Tennessee moss. Now, this moss came from my yard, and so this is a photograph, but then Jean got a scan at 1200 dpi, and then I found this toy online, which is called the Carson Microbright LED Pocket Microscope. And there's an image where I finally saw these leaves they were talking about. Because the other thing, because moss is a one cell, leaves are one cell, a single cell, that's very thin. And so the author, David, describes this as luminosity dominates this world. Each leaf is one cell layer thick, so light dances and flows through the moss, giving it an internal glow. So that's what shocked me. I felt like, what in the world? Why are these little sparkly things on here? I just want to point out that we have brought some of these things with us. Tools. This doesn't help much. And this is the Microbright, which I found out has a clip that goes on your cell phone. So I'm standing there trying to hold my cell phone with my hand and focus, and it's crazy, but it's here for you to look at and play with. And this is another little viewer. It's a digital microscope, and it actually will collect pictures. It actually will take pictures that you can save on there. So there are lots of little good tools to use, but none of them are real microscopes. They are not what they have at UT. But in fact, we asked Garrett Billings, who is the collections director for the herbarium, what would he advise? How do you know when you're collecting something? How do you know what kind of moss you have? Well, it's kind of difficult. You really need a really good microscope, he said, but if you're just going out in the field, take one of the little hand lenses. And you've seen, most of us have these little lenses with the 3 lens things, and I can't find mine, so I didn't bring it. Or, in fact, he recommended that.
Tell them.
So then we kept trying to figure this out. And so Jeannie and I are both trying to figure this out. Because when I looked at this thing right here, I got all excited, and I went to this photo guy, and I said, I think I have Entlodon seductress, otherwise known as little worm moss. And I looked on this, it was on this book. It looks like braids, you know, or asparagus. So that's what I thought it was. But here we see a stem with the capsule, the seta, and the leaves, and Jean did this drawing. She's really great at doing these artistic drawings to show you the different features. So the other part of BryoLab 101 is that we planted, or Jean planted, some samples of mosses from my yard in her yard. She's got them labeled here. So we also said we'll have extra moss for our terrariums. And it's doing pretty good. And as I mentioned, Garrett Billings indicated that we would have to use the dichotomous keys with better microscopes. And we talk about dichotomous keys, it's this route you go down, or maybe I could call it a rabbit hole that you go down, because after you figure out one feature, then you go down to the next selection, and then there are other features for you to choose between. And then based on that selection, you go to another set of features. And so I saw like 500 different items on this list. So I think you could spend a lot of time identifying moss. Apparently, someone got an assignment to do this identification. And she said you get these forms and shapes and concepts that are strange. At one point, she got to a key that said, capsule raised on a pseudo-podium, spherical black, shedding lid explosively. So, we definitely didn't get that one. I really can't see any sporophytes. So, these are some steps you take. If you have a moss lawn, and I did have a place in my yard where it was a nice, beautiful section of moss. I said, I'm going to keep it this way. And so I did all these steps. I mean, you actually go through there with tweezers and pull out little plants that want to grow in order to keep the moss just moss. And so you can do that for a while. Some people do it for a long while. But my moss spot now is no longer, has a lot of other things in it, even though I think I can bring it back. But that's what you want to do. You want to be delicate with the moss, and you'll find that you're doing that with the terrarium too. And here are some tools. These are some favorite tools that we use. I think Jean brought some of them today. But really, they're just tools that you need to deal with small things. And I think you probably can figure out the important thing is to keep it wet, to keep moisture. And when you have a terrarium, you spray it with water and cover it. And it's important to use distilled water or filtered water because you don't want all kinds of weird chemicals and minerals going on there. And so this is the irony. I think I mentioned it before. If you want moss, you can get moss. It's hard to eliminate. It's easier to have moss than to eliminate moss. But yet, it's not always transferable. If you have a friend with moss in their yard, maybe it will work in your yard, maybe not. And so that's kind of what our Brio Lab 101 is testing. But mosses are adapted to particular soils. But if you have one that's already adapted in one place, maybe or maybe not, it will adapt somewhere else. Here's a moss that won't survive in the southeast. And it's one that glows in the dark we saw on the slide earlier. So there are places where you can purchase moss, but there's no guarantee that the moss that gets shipped to you will actually work in your yard because you don't really know where that moss was grown in the first place. So just to recap, moss is an ancient plant, so give it respect. They have no roots or stems, but yet moss are very drought tolerant. Their structure is such that they are drought tolerant. When there is a drought and all of a sudden the water has to leave the moss leaves, well, the cell walls produce a chemical that will let them repair themselves, and then those walls just crunch together and look like black or brown dust or something. But the minute water comes in, then those leaves soak that water up so quick, and those cell walls get crushed, and the mosses fill up very quickly, and these chemicals that are produced by the moss then replace and repair the cell walls. So they are ready. The rest of us aren't ready for drought, but mosses are. Then the other point is that it is eco-friendly, that it is a good plant to have, that it performs a lot of services in our environment. It filters water, it holds soil, and prevents it from being washed away if you can get it to grow there. And it also is a carbon offset. And so some places they say it offsets more carbon in the trees, but then other people argue about other things, so I can't really verify that. And then evaluate your growing conditions. The ones where you see moss, then you have the right growing conditions. And they may not transfer, but you can try. It's very easy to pick up some moss. It comes up pretty easily. Well, except in some wood and some asphalt where the rhizoids were actually underneath the layers. And so pulled up some rock. Oh, okay. So, but you have to pay attention to it and realize that you can't get rid of it because it's very adaptable. It's kind of amazing. And so moss is not a signal that you have a problem in your garden. It's a benefit and one you should take advantage of. So we've got down here, rolling stone gathers no moss, so just stop that rolling. Oh, I think this is a cute little comic. But this is the book that we recommend to carry with you in the field. And then we have a little critter here who is talking about the fact that there are 12,000 species of moss through the world. Moss helps soak up rainfall and preserve soil moistures, allowing woodlands to thrive. So the next time you're outside, just pet some moss and say thank you. And here we have we have references here, but we also have a separate list that has a lot more references and sources if you want to look into this further. And you also can email us. So we'd be happy to answer any questions now, as well as put down there Knox County Master Gardeners, and Ask the Master Gardeners will answer questions too if you think of some later. So are there any questions?
So, when you're transferring, if you want to replant some, it's difficult to grow, but to do it, you're going to stomp it into the ground. So this is,
Well, it's not that it's difficult to do. It's
It
that
might be difficult.
it might be, you don't know if it's going to actually grow in the next place if the environment there is not right.
Gotcha.
But now you can walk on moss, it doesn't care. You can, and a good way to make sure those rhizoids have contact with the substrate is to step on it. And so, plus it's kind of fun to do that.
Is there anything you can feed your moss with other than water and that type of thing?
That is what your moss wants, water. You don't have to fertilize it, you don't have to mow it, you really don't have to do anything, other than pull out little intruders, basically water.
Does using a blower harm your moss?
I don't think
Okay.
moss care about blowers.
Okay, because like the landscaping people at the apartments,
They do.
One point about blowers, though, in my garden, since a lot of my moss seems to end up on cement and rock, sometimes the guys get the blowers too close to the moss and it will blow the moss off
Yeah.
the cement or the rock. And I don't know whether you can have a dialogue with a commercial lawn service to get them to change their ways, but that's just, it can be put back though. Like Roseanne's saying, it's really hard to kill moss. In fact, it may be impossible. Even when it's all dry, you can add water and get it back.
Embrace. Yes?
I have seen in a couple of places a more or less moss lawn. It is distinctly moss with a little wispy grass in happy combination with it.
Okay.
Has anybody else seen that? And do they
Yes.
have any idea where you get it?
You don't get it. That's what's happening in a portion of my yard that used to just be mowed, but it's in a lot of shade, and very slowly mosses are taking over, but yet there are those tufts, like you say, of grass.
This isn't tufts, it seems to be just in with the moss.
It is. You can pull some of it. Some of it comes in tufts. So far, I've done nothing, and we're starting to pay more attention to this and keep records. And I'm going to be doing that too.
Okay. And moss has other characteristics such as sterilization type benefits that people used it for bandages a long time
That's
ago.
right.
And so, and there are a lot of other characteristics of moss. And some, it's like, is this a folk tale? And others, you But there is so much research going on. And that's why we brought a bunch of things for you to look at. We have the books that were referenced. I have a couple of pages of keys over there if you're curious. And then we have some terrarium that we built along with the recipe for those and information.
For the soil, the
Yes,
substrate.
that's about the moss in there. So yeah, come take a look at the substrate for the terrarium. It looks like a birthday cake. Well, if are there other questions, you can talk to us later, but thank you for being here.